Hello and welcome everyone in today's session of Radio Sophia. I'm Arunika and today we have with us an eminent researcher and a celebrated author in organization behavioral studies, Dr. Nishant Uppal. Radio Sophia extends you a warm welcome. Thank you for accepting our invite. Dr. Nishant Uppal is Associate Professor at IIM Lucknow. He is here to share with us learnings and insights from his new book, Narcissus or Machiavelli, Learning Leadership from Indian Prime Ministers. Politicians and leaders are as layered and complex as the world of politics itself. So, what kind of leaders does it take to lead the largest democracy in the world? More importantly, how do leadership qualities impact decision and policy making? According to Dr. Nishant Uppal, we can predict the policy and political outcomes. Case in point, Indian prime ministers. From Nehru to Modi, are Indian PMs the best case studies in narcissism and Machiavellism? Dr. Nishant Uppal will walk us through his take on the subject. So, Dr. Uppal, we welcome you and let us begin with the very obvious question. How does narcissism and Machiavellism come together to shape leaders in the world's largest democracy?
Thank you for this question, Arunika. So your question is direct, so I'll also not, sugar wrap this question in any way. First of all, I must highlight that these two operative principles, narcissism and Machiavellism, they are not the personality trait which has been applied on a study like the one that I am presenting here. When an author or investigator or a social scientist has curiously tried to understand the degree of narcissism and Machiavellism in the political leadership to whichever constituents they represent. So this is not a unique study in terms of finding the variables. What we need to, however, certainly know that while we have such predictive studies where the examination of leadership style using narcissism and Machiavellism have been conducted on people such as Mugabe from Zimbabwe, Saddam Hussein, and these studies forecasted validly and the policy outcomes. Indeed, such studies have been conducted on the political leaders such as Barack Obama to Vladimir Putin. While we have umpteen studies conducted for the leadership of various countries, we still don't know nominal questions such as if Nehru and Modi were contemporaries, who would have more Twitter followers and whose post will be retweeted a greater number of times. This is an ordinary question, but we can deal with more controversial, so to say, to safeguard myself. And we can deal with more important questions, such as, despite evident dispositional temperamental differences, what could have been the commonalities amongst the people? Now listen to the names of the people who absolutely appear different in their nature and temperament. People such as Mohan Singh, Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi, and Modi. These are temperamentally, evidently extremely different people. But they have one thing which is common. These were the only prime ministers who completed more than one term. Remaining prime ministers, for fortunate or unfortunate reasons, were limited to a singular term. And we are not talking about one or two. We had more than 10 prime ministers, some people for 10 days, some people for a year. But these are the four, despite having temperamental differences, could complete over two terms. And how androgynous Indira Gandhi was supposed to be, or was, to handle the patriarchal parliamentary. You imagine a lady after about 2.5 decades of freedom, a parliament which has been dominated by males, emerges from being a Gungi Gudiya to Durga and what all other names were given to her. How androgynous she would have been to. What I can certainly say after my study, that she was definitely more androgynous than any other political leader India observed, at least at the premiership, because so far we have no one else to compare to. And we are already 75 years old in democracy, and we are maturing very, very fast. Still, we don't have any other evidence than Indra. Then how androgynous she would have been? Also, a question such as, why have we forgotten, as some of the literature suggests, that forgotten Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, he took certain radical decisions, the decisions which were pending in parliament, like liberalization. He took those radical decisions, and still he's tagged as forgotten leader. Now, these are certain unanswered questions which intrigued me, which made me curious, that while there are umpteen amount of studies done on the personality of premiership in variety of countries, surprisingly, for a 75-year-old democracy in a most complex nation, which has one of the lengthiest constitution, how we don't have a study like that? So therefore, Arunika, that while we have narcissism and Machiavellism as two critical parameters that I found common in all the studies done on the premiership of various countries, I tried to use them on a complex persona of one of the most complex jobs done by the people at premiership in India. I would just like to once again quote two important things. One, you see, who is a prime minister? Prime minister is amongst those 600 MPs, about 600 MPs, who are chosen from large constituencies. Out of these 550 to 600 MPs in lower house, 50% belong to a party to come in power, or they support that party. Out of those 250 to 300 people, about 30 people, the chosen ones, the critical ones, get portfolios. Out of those 30, few get important portfolios, very important portfolios, the big man, as so to say, finance minister and railway minister and defense minister. Out of these 3 or 4 or 5 people, one become prime minister, and they all are stalwart. So this is a very, very important position, and it's very difficult to reach there. Sustenance is even more difficult. Second, I would like to quote what Ambedkar said in one of the speeches, that Indian Prime Minister's position is nothing less than, in terms of complexity, the presidentship of USA. And he made this a statement in 1950s. And now, after several decades, we have now clearly accepted the proposition by Ambedkar. And therefore, Arunika, I thought of conducting this research, and thank you for acknowledging that.
So you have touched upon a lot of themes, and I want to take you back to the theme with which you opened the book. What if Nehru had a FB account? So in that context, do you think that in today's age of social media, influencers, attention economy, narcissism has become an indispensable quality to attain power over masses?
Attain power over masses, that's a complex statement, but let me establish what you begin with. We all are familiar with the work of Cambridge Analytica. It is no more hidden. Everyone knows about what Cambridge Analytica did for several political leaders, and they may be still supporting several countries. It is unknown. Second, we are familiar with the case of Google, where the CEO, the current CEO of Google, that Indian, I'm so sorry, I'm not recalling his name. He was invited for an interrogation, and the question was asked that when you search in Google the term idiot, why does the photo of Donald Trump appears there? And also, we know that how certain politicians are tagged with terms such as pappu and whatnot. So social media these days is important, but I am an old person. I am a person who used Orkut and then finally surrendered social media after Facebook. And I'm sure many other social platforms have emerged. But this is now a critical interface between the masses and the leadership. No more you need to actually go and make the speeches, especially after pandemic. There is a fear that I don't want to go to public forums where there are large masses gathered. That's a critical interface. And I must share this with you, Arunika. Since my interest is in the variable of narcissism and Machiavellism, a lot of researches have been done that how social media platform enhances someone's narcissism, how social media supplies narcissistic requirements of the leaders. So it is absolutely true that social media is a narcissistic supply to various political leaders across world. So what I certainly know is today, even Mohan Das Karamchandra Gandhi, if he was supposed to go to Dandi, he would also post this on Twitter that I am going. And lakhs of people will retweet, and possibly more than the people who actually followed would travel with him. Possibly in his time, the available social media vehicles were not as efficient as social media today is. So yeah, you are right. It's a great narcissistic supply to the leaders.
In continuation to that only, you have a very interesting insight in the book, and I quote you on this. Brand images are carefully crafted to establish a favorable public perception. And then you go on to explain how this is evident or reflective in the way Indira Gandhi wrapped her sari over her head, or the rose in Nehru's pocket, or Modi's attire all throughout his prime ministership. Then you also make a very interesting point on isomorphism, how the nation and the image are isomorphic. If you could elaborate on that for our listeners in context of your study.
Okay. So, Arunika, those who have shown any interest in Indian premiumship and Indian political history, especially about 2 decades since Nehru started coming to the forefront, and then after independence. And if you fast forward it, if you fast forward how the attire and outlook of Nehru changed, you would not find quick changes there or multiple changes there. In 30 or 35 years, Nehru changed his attire episodically and very carefully. So from his popular Nehru jacket that he will, go and talk about, he was at least humble looking, as I mentioned in my book, headmaster. He's a humble looking headmaster. He's going in an ordinary cloth. What would have been the need for Nehru to change that cloth? He would have continued to wear the same. It was a very careful selection. And I have quoted in my book that he had a particular fashion designer for him in his age as well, who would suggest, now you have to wear achkan, with achkan you have to put a rose, because you are promoting non-alignment movement. So you have to somehow display your image that you love yourself. And then you quoted Indira. And that is another fascinating story, because Indira, when she was growing in ladder, so although there are, evidences available of both kinds, some say Nehru promoted Indira, some say Nehru did not promote Indira, but whichever way, Indira was certainly a suppressed leader towards the beginning of her career, and therefore the term Gungi Gudiya. From being Gungi Gudiya to Durga, you need to change your outlook as well, as Durga did. You are sitting in Kolkata, you would know. Durga had multiple features and multiple propagandistic styles. So that slide, which is a white hair slide, tells the others that I am young as well as I am seasoned. And you also need to know that although people develop their style over the period of time, but again, if you fast forward Indira's attire and outlook, you would not find multiple evidences. You would find that happening. Now I am making a controversial statement. You would find that happening very, very quickly with our current propagandist prime minister. Some of the popular media has said when he increased his beard, I was thinking possibly he's following Virat Kohli, but some of the popular media said, no. He's trying to copy the outlook and the looks of Rabindranath Tagore because the Kolkata elections were nearing. So it is an important aspect of leadership, that how you present yourself. Unlike professors of IM, as I am, and you are prospective one, we have the liberty to wear whatever we want to wear in the class. But once you attain leadership, your attire should suit the psychology of the people. You should be accepted by them. Because somewhere, Arunika, I make this statement and I really believe in it, because I have written other books on leadership as well, that leader is a person who goes against the current by creating consensus amongst those who created that current in the first place. So you have to do everything possible. You have to use every possible weapon to ensure that these 550 more people who are sitting in lower house at least listen to you. So sometimes you use poetry, sometimes you use Sanskrit, sometimes you use attire, sometimes you use voice modulation. What you need to ensure is your ideologies are at least heard, if not accepted.
That's a great insight that you give. And in context of Indira Gandhi, you have specifically conducted a in-depth, amazingly in-depth study right from the beginning of her childhood to her rise to glory, and then of course the infamousity, connected with her. So you use a very interesting phrase for Indira Gandhi, that is compensatory narcissist. So could you tell us how this compensatory narcissism became a decisive influence in her political career?
Okay. So first we need to understand what is compensatory narcissism. And again, this is not the term that I invented. This is the term which is already in research. And Blema Steenberg has used this term and I have quoted him. So it is an infusion of the ambitious person with the reticent and contentious personality trait. It is a kind of mixture. I am narcissist. I am looking for public admiration. At the same time, I want to appear humble. So what I do, even in narcissism, which is of, some researchers say there are two kinds. One is a grandiosity narcissism. Second is vulnerable narcissism. While vulnerable narcissist has low self-esteem, and this vulnerable narcissist is continuously acting as a person seeking admiration from others. But the purpose of admiration is to enhance the self-esteem. But a grandiose narcissist is a person who asks for self-admiration from others because he or she wants to enhance his public image. So both of them are looking for admiration, but the purposes are different. And here you have Indira Gandhi over the period of time, as the great author and researcher Blema Steenberg suggests, that she played both the roles. In early childhood, she was an ignored child. Ignored child in the sense her father is continuously in jail, her father is engaged into social pursuits, his mother is not very active in the family, there is a split between the brothers and sisters. So she's in a turbulent family. That tumult in her personal life had impact on her entire family life through the time she remains alive, about her marital, matrimonial status, about her relationship with both the sons. So here, if you look at the personal aspect of Indira Gandhi, it is tumultuous. And this is where she is trying to seek the compensation for the public narcissism that she is displaying. And it is now, in the public domain, and this is not something I am making a statement of my own. This is in public domain, and it is a database statement which Sanjay Gandhi also made in public, that Indira takes advice on every single decision that I take. And therefore, I may appear very bold in public. I may be Durga, but there are my weaker spots. And these weaker spots are filled by people such as Sanjay Gandhi and possibly many others. So this is what compensatory narcissism, and therefore Blema Steenberg said that, yeah, she was susceptible to this phrase.
So going a little off track here, you discuss in the book, you have very rightly quoted the constitution on this, how the constitutional position of prime ministers in India, and they are considered as captains of the ship. So do you think our constitution necessitates adopting what we call narcissism or Machiavellism characteristics, which are just a necessary evil to make it in a federal constitutional democracy as huge as India?
There is a prof from Jadavpur University, whose name I am not recalling immediately, who has published an article in one of the newspapers like Statesman or possibly Hindustan Times or Hindu, I don't recall the name, where the author has justified Machiavellism and Narcissism both for the premiumship. As I said, reaching to that position requires variety of skills. Sustaining that position requires more number of skills. And therefore, it is undeniable that these two traits are missing, but what are always existent. But what we need to definitely know, are these really evil traits? Are they really dark traits? Because umpteen researches have been done, Anurima, which suggests that they have positive impact as well. So you are going to be a teacher in the future. I am the current teacher, and I have studied myself the relationship between narcissism of the teacher and the feedback that the students give. And the relationship was curvilinear, which means to a certain extent, narcissism helps a teacher to establish the credential in the class. And of course, if too much of narcissism is exhibited, if it is only and only about me, then the students start to bemoan and demur from the propositions of the teacher. So certain degree of narcissism and Machiavellism is essential, and we should not treat them as negative traits. Now, coming back to how do they help a prime minister to escalate to that position and sustain that position? It is unbetrayable fact that all those leaders at the top position necessarily had moderate level of narcissism and Machiavellism in their personality profiles. And this is not I am talking about, this is multiple researches done by multiple scholars across the
world. In continuation with this line of argument, I have this query. So in the last 6 weeks, the Asia-Pacific region has seen a massive geopolitical shift. Especially for India, the challenge of security is even bigger, So what consequences do you feel narcissism or Machiavellian traits will have in this context? Are they desirable, or will they create more problems for our security?
So this is a question which is dwelling into future, and therefore it is important that we look into past before we take a leap. This South Asia region has always been a cause of tumult across the world. And now it is a known fact that Taliban was funded, or rather various clans of Afghanistan were funded both by Russia as well as America. So Taliban is a gift of the conflict between the world powerhouses. Okay. Now what we need to know, are these powerhouses going to remain powerhouses forever? Are the new powers coming up? And if those new powers are coming up, what are going to be the impact of these new powers on the country like India? So let's see what happened in 1979 in Iran and Saudi Arabia. There were people interested in their oil, and therefore the funding of variety of kinds. The natural resources that these plateaus have is of immense value for a growing nation. USA realized it, Russia realized it, and now, interestingly, China has realized it. What we need to know that whenever you have a neighboring powerhouse, the smaller countries have invariably suffered, whether it is Cuba or Southern America or smaller nations in Europe because of Euro, all these nations suffer. By the time you realize that you have been losing, the ship has already sunk. And therefore, we need to be very, very attentive now to what is happening on the border areas, because emergence of Taliban with the funding and support of China is going to be a great threat for us. Why did we dislike Mohan Singh and his government? We disliked them and we voted against them because of the corruption and indecisiveness. These were the two primary factors that the current regime played on, and they came in power. Have we seen evidences of corruption and indecisiveness anymore? We don't know. We don't know. Possibly a research will be done in 2050 retrospectively to know in reality whether there is corruption and indecisiveness in the current government or not. At least popularly, it is unknown. So once the indecisiveness and corruption has gone, we have a team which is taking independent decisions. And we started bemoaning it. We are now saying that there is a despotic region coming up. Barkha Dutt made this statement when a lot of journalists were captured and booked behind the bars. That now the despotic generation of politicians have come in parliament to rule us. We bemoaned indecisiveness, and now we are bemoaning the other side of it as well. Would you like to have indecisive and corrupt government when you have disturbed borders? Is a question that we need to ponder. Or do we need someone who will take a strong-fisted decision as Indira Gandhi took when it came to the issues of Bangladesh? Yeah, so this is a thought that I also have, that do we want indecisive and corrupt people to lead us? Or do we want people who are excessively despotic, as some of the people will say?
That's very insightful. And since we are talking about our neighbors, you have provided an elaborate and eloquent account of Jawaharlal Nehru. So, in one place, you write that his historical accounts reflect restraint as well as immense self confidence. And then you also quote another author on how he almost became a tyrant, despite except it wasn't for few other qualities. So, could you briefly tell us how these two qualities impacted the policy decisions in his time, especially his efforts to garner opposition support, as well as India's partition and eventually the Indo-China War in early 1960s?
That's a very interesting question. Again, we are looking at this issue retrospectively, so we have to go farther in past. Now, we need to know what is the position of Nehru amongst the stalwarts such as Ambedkar, Bose, and Patel. They have differences of opinion. They have ideological issues. But there is a man by the name Gandhi in the fulcrum, who they refer to whenever the controversy goes beyond their intellectual capabilities or beyond their friendliness. Gandhi will come and try to resolve their conflicts. So which means Nehru is not at the helm of political decision till the time Gandhi is alive. Even the controversial decision that Gandhi took and enforced, that 50 crore rupees of transfer to Pakistan, was something which was not convincing to the people. And indeed, Patel has quoted in one of his letters that this was the primary reason Godse, sadly took a very difficult decision of killing Gandhi. This is the statement of Patel. However, after Gandhi died, Patel and Nehru both realized their capabilities, and they took their responsibilities according to their capabilities. For example, Nehru wanted to portray himself as a humble leader to the world because he is looking at non-alignment movement. And Patel is integrating the nation. Patel knows that if I become the prime minister, there is going to be greater conflicts in the party because not everyone may accept me. Already there is a pressure on Patel of an image of Hindu nationalist leader. However, Nehru does not have that kind of image. Nehru is perceived as a humble leader, and therefore he takes up the premiumship, although both of them were equitable contender to that position. But Patel knew that he cannot take up this position. And what I'm talking about is not from my personal viewpoint. Umpteen letters have been exchanged between these two leaders. Pre-Gandhi and post-Gandhi, if you compare them, you would see that there are ideological differences in them, and they are referring to Gandhi, that we cannot resolve it, let's go to Gandhi and let's go to some senior member and try to understand them. But after Gandhi's death, both of them come together and take the decisions in a very collegial manner. And what is happening to the other leaders? They are also important. But remember, towards the end of last tenure or the beginning of the last tenure of Nehru, unfortunately, no such leader is alive. All the people are new or possibly against the parliamentarism. They're taking up their own stances. So Nehru did not have anyone to his stature to contradict him. And that naturally led him to, become a singular authority. And therefore, sometimes people feel that he took all the decisions alone. We can't know about it because we don't know who were his confidants. But what we certainly know that the people who used to have conflict strongly with Nehru were now missing.
So, since you pinpoint how Gandhi played a fatherly influence in Nehru's life, you also write somewhere in the book that Nehru himself had a paternalistic tendency towards the nation. He was seen as a protector, as a reformist voice. So, how does this indicate the dark triad, his paternalistic qualities? So, he overpowered the narrative building around concepts of nation and nationalism. He strongly brushed aside any opposition to his foreign policy vis-a-vis Pakistan. How does this come together to reflect the qualities that your book talks about?
Okay. So, Arunima, when it comes to personality, there are two schools of thought. One, which is a state-like personality, which suggests that the personality evolve, which means the people's personality change. Whereas the other school of thought suggests no, there are tiny modifications, but more or less the personality remains same. If you look at Nehru's behavior in certain aspects of his life, especially the 3 books that he have written, which are still referred to, if you carefully read these books, there are tendencies of narcissism and Machiavellism which are reflecting in those books itself. He's self-promoting. He's saying that I don't want to have a lot of opposition. He's mentioning that I am right and others are wrong. So there are several indications in these books which suggest that, yeah, he has those tendencies. But we can't know ever because at least that is not there in public display. These factors started to emerge in public, especially after, as I mentioned, the stalwarts started to drop either physically or psychologically or philosophically from the Indian politics. Although some of them re-emerged when Indira came to power, but at least at the time of Nehru, they were satisfied and they were retired. So their retirement instigated some of the suppressed personality traits that the Nehru had. And when you have those traits, Arunika, usually the people have tendency to reflect themselves as the organizational member. So which means they are the organization and organization are representative of their persona. Which means, how do we know people such as Steve Jobs? We know him because he was a representative for Apple. What is Apple? A reflection of Steve Jobs. What is Tesla? Reflection of its CEO. What is Microsoft? Reflection of its CEOs. What is Prime Minister? Reflection of the nation. And that is what you mentioned, isomorphic personality. That I am the nation. So there is no difference between the nation and the Prime Minister. It is same and it has collided. Which means what I do is not that done by a leader. It is done by the nation itself. You see, there is an important thought around Indira as well in this regard, that it was not the defense. Of course, there are several books now written, but who took the credit of victory on Bangladesh or sometime, Pakistan? And some people even go ahead and say that the loss of China was one of the reasons why Nehru died. We don't know the reality. Nobody inquired this from Nehru, that why suddenly your health has started dipping. Is it because of your smoking habits? Is it because you are old? Is it because you are taking a lot of stress in the parliament? We never know. But popular media said that he died because we lost in China. So that's called isomorphism, the image collision between the constituents and the mother organization.
We have a question from the audience. Shailendra Kumar asks you, how would you assess Dr. Mohan Singh on narcissism or Machiavellianism?
If you want to know this answer, I would strongly recommend that you pick up the book and just read the last chapter, where I compare the personality of all the prime minister amongst various personality traits. What I can talk about for sure is the book Accidental Prime Minister is correctly defining the position of Manmohan Singh. Manmohan Singh was a very active policy support during the time of Narasimha Rao. He was also very active before. But what happened to him after that? Why was he choice of, let's say, the stalwarts of Congress, the Gandhi family? Why did they choose him? And this is not unknown, and this has been now recognized by Manmohan Singh's daughter, who has written certain books. I am not recalling the name, which clearly says that he never aspired to become prime minister of a nation. And interestingly, whenever the controversy arose, he said, I am resigning. So he remained reluctant throughout his tenure, and he had no love for the chair. And now look at the ideas of ambition and ideas of leadership, with how swiftly he disembarked from that position. And why swiftly? Because as I just mentioned, that the previous regime was bemoaned for its corruption and indecisiveness. There were scams to an extent of 10 lakh crores. But there is not a single dent on Manmohan Singh. He is leading a peaceful life. And that cannot happen to someone who is careful and articulate, who knows what decisions I need to partake, what decisions I need to pass on. So I cannot entirely reject the idea that, yeah, he was a shrewd administrator. He took the decisions carefully and he owned certain decisions even more carefully. But the degree of ambition, I sincerely doubt that, specifically when you start to compare his degree of ambition with the people such as Morarji Desai, Nehru, and Modi, and whosoever else. So there are certain parameters of narcissism on which he is not scoring very high. But on certain parameters of Machiavellism, I have doubts that how come he is absolutely undented. Because he was leading a team of a lot of corrupt individuals. I don't know whether the court has finally given the verdict, but we know there were scams. That's undeniable. And he came out of all those undented, and in no media ever people said that he was involved in any of the corruption.
That's very interesting. And in line with that, Dr. Manmohan Singh, he had quite a scholarly prowess to his credit. Jawaharlal Nehru as well. He was quite a scholarly person, as you point out in the book. And then you write about what Tharoor says about Modi. And I quote that Narendra Modi does not have the same educational credentials as his predecessors. So how do narcissistic or Machiavellianism, make up for this lack in Modi's case?
This is a very interesting question. Now, let me first share with you that what is the importance of education, especially for leadership escalation. It gives you a currency, it gives you a credential that when I am speaking on the basis of a research. I am speaking on the basis of wide, important evidences available in authentic sources. And not only those sources are available elsewhere, I have myself published. Because when you publish, there is a third party acknowledging your work. And that third party is publishing house. So if I write something, publishing house scrutinize the material very, very carefully. They see, are you quoting something wrongly? Are you quoting something deliberately to popularize your book? They scrutinize and they filter out those matter. And no nation had any powerful leader who would get the acknowledgement of international publishing houses like Penguin or HarperCollins. Now see, we have prime ministers who have done a lot of scholarly contribution, including Nehru and Rao and Manmohan Singh. They have done great scholarly work, including Tharoor himself, though he's not at premiumship as of now. Then you compare the premiumship of Rajiv Gandhi or current Prime Minister Modi. What is his reflection on intellectualism? how does he treat the intellectuals? Or what kind of policies are promoting intellectualism? So if you look at NEP, National Education Policy, are there elements which are promoting intellectualism, or are they promoting professionalism and quick job? We are trying to create a brigade of middle class which is going to run the economy, because middle class is the one that pays the taxes and the penalties. However, there is a popularism associated with narcissistic tendency. That narcissism, if it is in real sense, it covers for the individual. If I am great narcissist, which means if I am highly narcissist individual, the people should not know that I am narcissist. I appear humble, I appear naive, sometimes I appear rookie, but from inside I know that what are my aspirations and ambitions. So you are right that in democracy, which is currently, in a phase where it decides its leader by the popularity, because you see, there is a very famous Urdu couplet by Iqbal. I don't remember it absolutely, but I remember the threads of it, which says, जमहूरियत उस तर्ज़े हुकूमत को कहते हैं कि जिसमें बंदों को गिना जाता है, तोला नहीं जाता. Now, while Plato and Aristotle, they all promoted aristocracy, in India today we have voters' democracy. And who are the voters? You just require 50% of the votes in your favor, and they can come from a panwala, they can come from an uneducated, humble lady from a village. Doesn't mean that she's not intelligent. I'm just trying to create a pictorial description. And her vote can nullify the vote of one of the most educated person who also was president of our community, our country, Kalam. So Kalam's vote is equal to the vote of that lady. So if I am a narcissistic individual, I would like to see from where I can get the vote more easily. Convincing Kalam would be slightly difficult than convincing that old lady. And yeah, you are right that narcissism and Machiavellism play a great role in finding the right person to convince.
We have a question from the audience. How would you assess P.V. Narasimha Rao and Lal Bahadur Shastri on Machiavellism, since their tenure was shorter compared to other PMs like Indira Gandhi and Nehru?
Okay, so Lal Bahadur Shastri's tenure was shortened by sad incidents, and it's not that he gave up the position, he died. And Narasimha Rao lived his age. You see, Narasimha Rao has been called as forgotten prime minister because he did not take credit as much as the current leadership would like to take the credits of larger decisions. He would promote someone else. He promoted Mohan Singh a lot, that it is not my decision, it is a collective decision, and so. And therefore, people have forgotten him. But we also need to know that why at all he was taking such, such instance that I don't want to come in the forefront. Because he was taking the decisions and imposing it on a country after rejection of those decisions for more than 1.5 decades. The issues of privatization is started to come into the parliament much before 1991, but he was the face of it. And he didn't want, because you never know how the privatization and liberalization is going to unfold in a country. And you see, after Narasimha Rao, we had multiple prime ministers, which means he was right in accepting a backseat, despite having the premiumship in his court. If you look at the definition of Machiavellism, it fits in perfectly. Because had he taken the front seat, possibly he would have been discredited or credited for all the instability in the parliament that came in India after Narasimha Rao. And yeah, when it comes to Indira Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, who remained in power for more than a decade, for more than 2 tenures, you cannot sustain that position unless you are sufficiently shrewd to understand the requirement of the nation. And both Indira Gandhi and Nehru understood what the nation wanted. And they took certain decisions which possibly other indecisive leaders might have procrastinated. The decisions such as the decision on Bangladesh war, decision on Blue Star, decision on emergency, whatever. These were some very strong-fisted decisions and taken carefully at the right time. Again, I invite you to read the last chapter to know in greater detail how am I comparing them.
I think we have almost run out of time, but I do want to ask you, since we are a community of avid researchers, what advice would you like to tender to us and to people who are trying to do a study of the level that you have done, where so many controversies are involved, and we might be imputed with the challenge that we are reading too much into the lines?
So first of all, I would demur from the term called controversy. See, the controversy comes when you don't use robust parameters and you don't use valid data. When you have valid data source and when you have a robust parameter. So to simplify it, if you have a perfect lens and you have a perfect source of light, see, nothing is perfect. I'm just trying to give you a indicative answer. Then there is no controversy. If you look at the book carefully, rarely I have given any of my opinion. And as a researcher, I shouldn't have any opinion when I'm writing a paper. And that is what we spend a lot of time in understanding, that how to ensure that there aren't any biases, self-biases or researchers' biases in the output in terms of publication. So my singular advice, at least at this point in time, is be an independent researcher. So who is an independent researcher? An independent researcher is one who knows the validity of the source of information, who knows where the perfect parameters live. You combine them, and then you have an outcome which may intrigue people's thought, that may support policy decisions.
I thank you, Professor, for joining us today. I think we couldn't have asked for a better session. Himadri would like to give you a thank you note.
Thank you, Professor Uppal, for accepting our invite. If you wouldn't mind, can we have some more live audience questions for you from the book?
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
So I open the session for a few more questions. Before people start asking their questions, Professor Uppal, I've read parts of your book, and as I said earlier, it's a delightful read. And coincidentally, today is also the birthday of one of our prime ministers, of whom you have written a lot, Dr. Mohan Singh. So I just wanted to know, I have two questions for you. The first question is basically with regards to with regards to two prime ministers, Dr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So to some extent, both Dr. Singh and Mr. Vajpayee held a relatively amicable relationship with the opposition on the personal front. And I mean, even though there were corruption charges on the government. Now, how would you think this kind of an image affects the electoral results of the parties? And I mean, I say this in the context of the fact that the much celebrated Shining India campaign of Vajpayee lost his elections, while Manmohan Singh retained it in spite of being under severe pressure of coalition politics. So given this kind of a personality, how do you think the electoral results get affected, or how does the electorate kind of view it?
So if I have understood your question correctly, I'll rephrase it and let me know if I have understood it right. You say that what is the effect of relationship between the leader and the opposition on the electoral result, right?
Absolutely.
Oh, it's huge.
No, I mean, not by opposition, I just don't mean the opposition parties, but also the ability to accept opposition. I mean, not the opposition party alone. Yeah.
You're right. Where does this tolerance come from, Himadri? That's the question we should ask. Such kind of tolerance come from the basic principle of leadership, that I am open for opinions. I will take the decision which I feel is correct in the context. But I am ready to change my convictions when I get new knowledge. And that was the quality of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And where does where does this tolerance and flexibility comes from? Such tolerance and flexibility come from what kind of scholarly and education background you have. You see, the intolerance is natural when you have grown to a position only and only because of popularistic tendencies that you have. But if you have been pushed by scholarly, impetus by the public, so Atal Bihari Vajpayee did not come to the power because he was a populist leader. Mohan Singh did not come to the power because he was a populist leader. He was the choice of the parliamentarians. However, sometimes these choices are manipulated by creating a power distance. Power distance in the sense, if I were to ask you, give me 3 names of the second line of leadership of Saddam Hussein or Khomeini. Possibly you may not know it. Why? Because everything in the country was done by Saddam Hussein and Barack Obama. But if you look at Atal Bihari Vajpayee and Manmohan Singh, there are others also who are in the forefront. Let me share with you a personal incident, Himadri, and this may interest you otherwise as well. How many biographies and autobiographies are available in the country for the second line of leadership versus how many biographies and autobiographies are available for the premiumship? That tells you about a leader, that how much tolerance he had for the second line of leadership when they approached with the ideas. So that is the power distance created by the aura of the narcissistic leader is not good for the voters' democracy, is never good for the power. There has to be a camaraderie, there has to be amicable relationship with all the people, because who says that if you have an opposite opinion, you are wrong? Who says if you are sitting in the opposition, you are not worth listening to? You should know that, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was one of the, contended and desired leader for international meetings by the opposition leaders. Can the current regime do something like that? We don't know. Let's say, imagine if one of the foreign trips, you have Rahul Gandhi sent as an ambassador. We don't know whether that is a possibility in the current regime or not, but we have observed that happening previously.
Yeah, I think that answers it really well. I'll ask people if they have other questions to raise their hands. I'll just have another question for you. This is slightly beyond the mandate of the book, but if you were to kind of assess the narcissistic and the Machiavellism traits on a regional level, how would you judge the chief ministers of our country? I mean, who would you rate?
That's a study I am still supposed to take, and I cannot comment as of now. But you are right that it is an essential research, and we also need to know not only the regional leaders, but we also need to know the other leaders in the country, in the parliament. We should not limit it to prime ministers. That's done. Now we need to look at the other ministers, other portfolio managers, the people in the upper house as well, and state assemblies too. Because we know that we have current prime minister who has escalated from state assembly only.
Right. We have Shantan with a question. Shantan, if you would want to ask it.
Yeah, sure. So am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. So hello, Professor Uppal. I think it was a good talk. Without further ado, let me take you to my question. It is regarding the first chapter of your book. If I'm not mistaken, it's if Nehru has an FB account. So these days we see that many politicians are popularizing their moves and their future trips, etc., on the social media accounts. But my particular question in this regard is that it is mainly the upper class intelligentsia or the intellectual people who actually, has access to these social platforms, especially Twitter. And these are people who are usually critical of the government. As in the case, if it's, I can't say it's a kind of a gross generalization, but then it is usually the case that people, upper class intelligentsia is more or less the critic of the government, forms the critic of the government. And and these are not the people who usually goes to rallies or the road shows, etc., but it is the rank and the file who usually participates in these. So how do you reconcile these two contradictory moves? I mean, the move that the politicians take in popularizing or showcasing their political agenda on the social media platforms, and the connection with the rank and the file that goes on with it. Thank you.
It's a very interesting thought. And let me begin by saying that today, social media platforms such as Twitter are more powerful than the most powerful politician in the world, which is Donald Trump or Barack Obama or anyone else. USA holds the flagship today, and the president of US is considered as the most powerful person in the world. Twitter is even more powerful than, because Twitter can close their accounts. So what we need to understand fairly, Mr. Ghosh, is that how far Twitter can go. I totally agree that Twitter is not a social media platform which is available for everyone. But what happens after you have tweeted? It comes on NDTV, it comes on Aaj Tak, and then smaller videos are circulated on WhatsApp. Who does that? These are not the politicians per se, but they have a lot of second line managers who popularize the singular statement made by them. And how is it substantiated? It is substantiated by nearly 1/3 of Indian population who is currently carrying a smartphone. And they are the ones who would come for the mass rallies. And even in the mass rallies, they will carry that mobile and hear what they want to hear. Because purpose of coming to the rally is not necessarily to listen to the leader. There are other benefits which have been promised to me. But even sitting in those rallies, I am listening to WhatsApp messages that I have received. So while Twitter or Instagram, these are some of the social media platforms which are not available to everyone, but they are the most powerful vehicles these days, utilized and broken into pieces by the top leaders of the world to share their ideologies with the masses. Look at how, I'll just quote one, and this is something which may intrigue your thought. Look at how Yogendra Yadav is using Twitter to showcase his ideologies about the farmers' protest. Farmers' protest being tweeted by Yogendra Yadav and coming to NDTV, because Twitter is not a platform which cannot be further popularized by the second line of managers of these leaders. So I do agree that this is a paradoxical tool which is available for the, at least the middle class, but we should also acknowledge that social media platform is now quoted in the news and the popular vehicle. So I come across almost at least one news which says that somebody has posted something on the Twitter. I would not like to go to the Twitter, but I know there is something called Twitter existing, and that is good enough for me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your response.
Thank you, Professor Uppal. I think with this, we'll come to the close of the session. Thank you once again, Professor Uppal, for sparing your valuable time. Also thank Arunika for moderating the session. And we hope to see you, Professor Uppal, in our campus sometime in the future when the COVID thing recedes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting.
Thank you to the audience for joining in. Bye-bye.